In 105 AD, a Chinese court official named Cai Lun stood over a vat of boiling water. Inside was a disgusting slurry of tree bark, old rags, and fishing nets. His servants had been ordered to gather the vilest waste they could find. His colleagues watched in disgust. His emperor watched in confusion. But Cai Lun stirred the mixture until it became a thick, soupy pulp. Then he spread it across a flat bamboo screen, pressed it dry, and peeled away a thin, white sheet. He had just invented paper. And in that moment, he had created the single most dangerous technology in human history. The Chinese emperor immediately recognized its power. He ordered Cai Lun promoted to the highest ranks of the imperial court. And then he issued a decree that would stand for 6 centuries. Anyone who revealed the secret of papermaking to a foreigner would be executed. Not imprisoned, not exiled, executed. For 600 years, the Chinese guarded this secret with their lives. Entire families were slaughtered for speaking about it. Entire villages were burned for trading it. The punishment was so brutal that for centuries, no one dared to break the oath. But in the 8th century, a single act of betrayal changed everything. And within a few generations, paper had done something that no army, no empire, and no ideology had ever achieved. It had rewritten the map of the world. This is the story of the most important technology you never think about. The thing you write on, read from, and throw away without a second thought. The thing that built civilizations, toppled kings, and made you literate. This is the history of paper. Before paper, humanity had a problem. We had information, we had stories, we had laws and poetry and scientific discoveries, but we had no way to share them efficiently. The Egyptians had papyrus, a thick, brittle material made from reeds. It was expensive and fragile. The Romans used wax tablets. You could write on them, but you had to melt them down to reuse them. The Chinese had bamboo slips, heavy, bulky strips of wood that you had to carve with a knife. One single book could weigh 50 pounds. To read 100 pages, you had to carry a whole shelf. And then there was parchment made from animal skins. It was durable, but to make a single Bible, you needed the skins of 300 sheep. Only the richest people on earth could afford a book. Knowledge was rare, it was expensive, and it was controlled by the powerful. Cai Lun changed that forever. His recipe was almost comically simple. He took tree bark, hemp, old rags, the kind of waste that nobody wanted. He soaked it in water, pounded it into a pulp, pressed it flat, and let it dry. What emerged was thin, flexible, absorbent, and incredibly cheap. You could write on it, you could fold it, you could roll it up and carry it in your pocket, and it cost almost nothing to make. The Chinese emperor was so impressed that he made Cai Lun a nobleman. Paper became the official recording medium of the imperial court. Historians wrote down everything: taxes, laws, military campaigns, and dynastic histories. Within a century, paper had transformed Chinese civilization. But the emperors knew that if this technology spread beyond their borders, they would lose their advantage. So they made it a state secret. The penalty for revealing the secret: death. Not just death, death by execution in the most brutal way imaginable. In some cases, the entire family of the offender was killed. And for centuries, the secret held. In 751 AD, a group of Chinese papermakers were captured by Arab soldiers at the Battle of Talas in what is now Central Asia. The Abbasid Caliphate had just defeated a Chinese army, and among the prisoners were skilled papermakers. The Arabs had never seen anything like it. They had papyrus from Egypt and parchment from Europe, but this was different. It was smoother, cheaper, and easier to write on. The Caliph ordered the Chinese prisoners to reveal their secrets, and this time there was no Chinese executioner to stop them. Within a decade, Papermaking had spread across the Islamic world. The Arabs improved the recipe using linen and hemp instead of tree bark, and developing water-powered mills to grind the pulp faster. By the 9th century, Baghdad had become the papermaking capital of the world. The city boasted over 100 paper mills, and they were producing books, maps, and scientific treatises at a scale never before seen in history. And that's when something extraordinary happened. Paper supercharged the Islamic Golden Age. For centuries, Islamic scholars had been translating Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian astronomy. But without paper, these works existed as fragile scrolls and heavy codices. Only the wealthiest libraries could afford them. Now, paper made books cheap. Copies multiplied. Knowledge exploded. Also, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad became the intellectual center of the known world. Scholars from across the empire gathered to debate, translate, and discover. Paper didn't just record knowledge, it democratized it. But the most important part of this story is what happened next. The papermaking process slowly moved westward from Baghdad to Damascus, to Cairo, to Morocco, and then, in the 12th century, it crossed into Europe. The first European paper mill opened in the Spanish town of Zátiva in 1150. The technology had traveled through Islamic Spain, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews had coexisted for centuries. But European papermakers faced a problem. They didn't have the same materials. They didn't have hemp fields or bamboo forests. So they improvised. They made paper from cotton, linen rags, and eventually wood pulp. By the 14th century, paper had spread across Italy, France, and Germany, but it was still being used for mundane purposes, shipping labels, record keeping, and cheap books. And then everything changed again. In 1440, a German goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg began experimenting with movable type. He wanted to create a machine that could mass-produce books faster than any human scribe. He combined three technologies: paper from China, movable type invented in Korea, and the wine press from Europe. The result was the printing press. In 1455, Gutenberg printed 180 copies of the Bible. They were beautiful, precise, and identical. The first printed book in Europe. The old world would never be the same. Within 50 years of Gutenberg's press, there were more books in Europe than there had been in the previous 1,000 years combined. By 1500, over 20 million books had been printed, and those are only the ones we know about. Paper didn't just make knowledge cheap, it made knowledge dangerous. Here's what I mean. Before paper, the Catholic Church controlled the Bible. Priests read it aloud in Latin, and ordinary people just had to trust that they were hearing the truth. If you wanted to read the Bible for yourself, you had to be a scholar or very, very rich. But paper changed that. The printing press made Bibles available in local languages: German, English, French, Dutch. People could read the Bible with their own eyes and interpret it with their own minds. And that was the spark that lit the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, Germany. The Theses were a scathing critique of the Catholic Church. They were printed on paper, and within weeks, they had spread across Europe. The Church had no answer. They couldn't burn every pamphlet. They couldn't silence every reader. The technology was too fast, too widespread, and too cheap. Paper didn't just make knowledge accessible, it made it uncontainable. For the first time in history, ideas could spread faster than armies. Reformers, scientists, and revolutionaries used paper to challenge every form of authority: religious, political, and intellectual. The scientific revolution happened because paper allowed scientists to share their discoveries. Galileo, Newton, Copernicus, none of them could have changed the world without paper to spread their ideas. The Age of Enlightenment happened because philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Locke could reach thousands of readers with a single pamphlet. And the American Revolution happened because Thomas Paine printed common sense a 47-page pamphlet that convinced ordinary colonists to fight for independence. All of this, every revolution, every war, every movement for freedom was made possible by a sheet of paper. But paper has a dark side, and it's darker than you probably realize. The same technology that spread freedom also spread censorship. Governments burned books, they burned pamphlets, they burned libraries, and they burned people who refused to stop reading. In 1499, the Catholic Church began issuing lists of books that Catholics were forbidden to read. In 1559, Pope Paul IV published the first index of prohibited books. Tens of thousands of texts were banned, burned, and destroyed. In 1933, the Nazis held book burnings across Germany. They burned over 25,000 books, works by Jewish, socialist, and liberal authors. Crowds cheered as the flames consumed centuries of human thought. Paper is the most powerful tool ever created, and because it's so powerful, people have always tried to control it. But here's the part of the story that will make you angry. For centuries, paper production was reliant on a material you probably don't think about: cotton and linen rags. Those were the main raw materials, and that created a bottleneck. By the 19th century, Europe was running out of rags. Book publishers were desperate. Paper makers started using wood pulp, cheaper and easier to find. But wood pulp contains a chemical called lignin, which makes paper acidic, and acid paper falls apart. Most books printed between 1850 and 1950 are turning to dust right now in libraries around the world. Librarians call it the slow fire. Tens of millions of books are literally crumbling away. But here's the real outrage. In the 1960s, scientists discovered that acid-free paper could last hundreds of years, but publishers refused to use it because it was more expensive. They valued short-term profit over long-term preservation. And that is the tragedy of paper. The thing that gave us knowledge, that gave us freedom, science, and democracy, is being destroyed by greed. By the 20th century, paper had become ordinary. So ordinary that we stopped thinking about it. We use 400 million tons of paper every year. That's enough to cover the entire world in a layer of paper the thickness of a dollar bill every year. But there's a twist you probably haven't noticed. Paper is disappearing. In 2007, the Kindle was released. In 2010, the iPad. Suddenly, books, newspapers, and magazines moved from paper to screens, and the paper industry began to collapse. In 2010, newsprint production fell by over 30%. In 2020, paper mill closures accelerated. Students started taking notes on laptops. Businesses moved to digital documents. And people started reading books on their phones. We are currently living through the most significant change in the history of human communication. We are moving from paper to pixels. But here's the thing. Paper never really disappears. It just transforms. We still use paper for money, for contracts, for legal documents, for passports, for school diplomas, and for the receipts we throw in the trash. And there's one more thing. Paper is the most sustainable material we have. It's made from trees, a renewable resource. It's biodegradable, it's recyclable, and all those digital products you use. They require energy, mining, and data centers that consume massive amounts of water and electricity. Paper might just save the environment. A sheet of paper is the most ordinary thing in your life. You write on it, you read from it, you throw it away. You probably don't even think about it. But that ordinary thing is the most extraordinary technology you will ever touch. It carried the words of Confucius and Aristotle. It carried the laws of Rome and the poetry of Persia. It carried the Declaration of Independence and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It carried the genetic code of the human species and the equations that got us to the moon. Paper is the reason you know how to read. It's the reason you can vote. It's the reason you can think for yourself. And today, you're about to throw it in the trash without giving it a second thought. Think about that the next time you pick up a pen. If this story surprised you, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, the hidden histories behind the things you touch every day. And drop a comment below. What's the one piece of paper that changed your life? See you in the next one.